What if I told you that the number one reason your team is struggling to perform is you? Or more specifically, your ability to communicate. Transparent communication is one of the most critical skills as a manager, and it's more important now than it ever has been before. In this video, I'm going to break down why communication is so important and give you a kind of unexpected solution that I think you're actually going to find really, really helpful. So let's dive in. So why is communication more important than ever? Quite frankly, it's because of constant change. We live in a world that is moving faster than it ever has before. And people need to be able to act faster than they ever have before. But in order to act, they need information. I know tons of managers out there who are extremely frustrated that they feel like they're having to make all the decisions, that their team never takes ownership of problems and just goes out and proposes solutions. 9 times out of 10, the reason that they're not proposing those solutions is because they don't feel like they have enough context in order to understand the problem and present a solution that is really going to fit what's going on. They simply don't have enough information. Managers forget that from this higher level role, you often have access to more information from around the organization, information that your team may not have. This could be information that's simply because of, your position and the meetings that you're in, or it could be because of the relationships that you have because you've been at the organization longer. Either way, you often have more information than the people on your team. And if you don't have a way to share that information, ultimately, that's your fault, and they're not going to be able to act as quickly as you need them to act if you want your team or your company to be as successful as they can be, as you need them to be. I remember years ago, I was in a manager development course where the way they put this was that managers are not communicated to, they're communicated through, right? You as a manager, you're the in-between, you're the bridge between the people on your team and the higher level leadership and the rest of the organization. And so you need to have ways to move information through you as quickly as possible, but especially you need to move it down. And so if you find yourself, you're one of those managers that's frustrated that people aren't taking ownership or moving fast enough, I have a solution to propose to you that I think is going to sound a little counterintuitive. It's not going to be something that most people are going to think sounds correct, but here it is. You need to be having more larger meetings. I'm going to say that again. More larger meetings. I think most people would hear that, and the first thing they think of is something like their company all hands, which usually seems like a complete waste of time, but it's not. At least they're not if they're done in the right way. So I want to break this down into the more meetings and then the larger meetings. Every organization on the planet is trying to get rid of meetings, right? We have too many meetings. I go into all kinds of workspaces all over the country, and there's not a meeting room in sight because there's just meetings everywhere. Everybody feels like their entire day is consumed by meetings. Well, I would say they're the wrong meetings. They're the wrong kinds of meetings. Here's what I mean by more meetings and how you know if you actually need more meetings. There's a great book called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, he was one of the first places that I got this idea of more larger meetings because in his effort to control Special Operations Command in Iraq back in 2008, he actually had a daily all-hands meeting for all 4,000 members of the organization. And the reason why they had to have a daily meeting is because he said the cadence of your meetings has to match the pace of change of whatever you're meeting about, right? So often we think of meetings just as being on the calendar based on some kind of temporal truth. Oh, it's a weekly meeting or it's a monthly meeting or whatever it is. But that may or may not have anything to do with how often you actually need to meet, right? If you are meeting weekly, but the situation that you're meeting about only changes monthly, and you're wasting a lot of time. You're giving updates, but you're not actually making any decisions. There's no reason for you to be in the meeting, right? Because you're not making any decisions there. If you're meeting weekly, but things are changing on a daily basis or more frequently than weekly, then you also can't do anything in that meeting because you're having to have other meetings in order to make the decisions, right? Or you're having other emails in order to make the decisions. The pace of change is so fast that you're having to make decisions outside the meeting. And so again, the meeting is irrelevant. And so more than likely, I would say the reason your meetings aren't effective because of how quickly the world is changing is because you're not having the meetings frequently enough to match the pace at which things are changing. So the meetings aren't effective because you can't make the relevant decisions in the meeting. They had to be made beforehand. They had to be made some other time. And so yes, in this case, the meeting is a waste of time. But if you had those meetings more frequently, then the meeting could be the time. That meeting could be the time where you actually make the decision. So that's the more meeting piece. What I mean by larger meetings, because again, I think most people think of staff meetings, all hands meetings as a waste of time. But there's one person at least who disagrees with me, and that is the CEO of the most valuable company in the world. Jensen Huang famously has 50 to 60 direct reports, and he does not have one-on-ones. In fact, in their staff meetings, they actually like to invite as many employees as will come to that meeting. Because Jensen Huang, the way he sees it, there is nothing that he knows that only one other person on his staff should know, right? And if more than one person need to know it, why not make it so that everybody knows it, right? Why not just have a big meeting with the whole staff, with as many people as can pack in the room, to share all the information. If it's not relevant to them, then they don't use it, but now they have that little bit of context, because not only is the pace of the world increasing, but the problems are becoming more complicated, which means the solutions are more complicated. They're utilizing different parts of the business. Different people have to work together in order to create these solutions. So you need more people that have more context if you want to be able to actually solve the problems on the ground. So if you are one of these managers who's struggling to keep up with the pace of change, who's complaining that your team isn't taking ownership, your team isn't making decisions, your team isn't providing solutions and moving as quickly as you think they need to, I would think about whether or not that's your fault. How are you communicating? Do they actually have all the information that they need in order to make the decisions that you want them to make? If they don't, then one thing to consider is more larger meetings. Make sure your meetings match the pace of change of whatever the meeting is about, so you can make those meetings impactful, where you can actually make decisions. And make sure every single person that needs to be in that room is in that room, so that you can share and disseminate information as widely as possible. That is, rather than having to decide individually, oh, this person yes, this person no, making sure that as many people have as much information as possible. That is what is going to make sure your team can move as fast as you need them to move. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe. We're putting out a lot of new content. The world is changing faster than ever. And if you want to be able to succeed in this new ever-changing world as a manager, you need new leadership skills. That is what we are providing you here at Better Everyday Studios. I will see you next time.